According to Stats Canada, 388,000 people aged 15 to 24 couldn't find work in 2013, and it's more than double the unemployment rate for those in higher age groups. It's also well above where it was before the 2009 recession. The Broadbent Institute wants Canadian businesses and the federal government to create 186,000 full-time jobs to help young people make a successful transition from education to work, what they call a job guarantee. I spoke earlier with the Institute's executive director, Rick Smith, and asked him why Canada needs such a guarantee.
Canada's approach to youth unemployment at the moment is not working. Youth are the only demographic that have not recovered their employment since the recession. In fact, youth unemployment in our country right now is worse than it was pre-recession. Yeah. And so clearly we need to rethink what's going on, and we think it's a good idea to learn from best practices elsewhere in the world. And the European Union has come out with this idea of a youth jobs guarantee to ease young people into the workforce for that critical first employment experience. And we can afford to do this in Canada. We need to do it.
You're talking about a proposal that would be a combination of government money and private sector money.
Yeah.
Now, there will be those who say on the private sector side, you shouldn't compel the private sector to spend money, that they should make those decisions based on reasons of investment and efficiency.
Yeah.
Why is it the right thing to kind of create a system that says, you're sitting on a lot of money, this is how we want you to use it?
Well, we're challenging the private sector to step up. I mean, there's an enormous amount of dead money out there in the private sector that could, a fraction of which, if applied to this issue of youth unemployment, could have a massive impact. And the federal government has actually disinvested in the youth employment strategy over the last few years. And we think it's time for the federal government to both step up to the plate again and challenge the private sector to partner in a new and interesting way.
One of the areas that we've seen lots of changes is in the notion of kind of mentoring, training on the job. Is there a way to encourage businesses to do more of that? Because instead what we've seen is policies like the Foreign Worker Program that fills those gaps without training on the ground.
Absolutely.
How do we do that?
Well, I think it's time to think creatively in that way. I mean, TD Economics came out with an important study a little while ago on what they called scarring of young people. What happens to highly trained, willing, hardworking young people who in that critical period after they finish their apprenticeship or schooling can't find that first employment experience. And then in later years, that translates into diminished income later in their earning years, and that's bad for the Canadian economy. So, I think it is time for the federal government to use its dollars wisely in partnership with the private sector in a variety of employment possibilities: summer jobs, co-op placements, mentorship opportunities, paid internships.
Is there a way to measure, it sounds like TD was kind of getting at this, but is there a way to measure the return on that investment? Because some would say you need flexibility in the labor force, and youth are probably unemployed because they can most afford to be. They have other ways of support, mostly their parents. So is there a way to measure the return on the investment in this kind of programming?
Oh, absolutely there is. I mean, this TD Economics report actually measured directly what happens to that young person if their first job opportunities are limited. Very real, measurable, diminished wage opportunities later in their careers. And the numbers around this issue are stunning. I mean, young people at the moment are unemployed at a rate more than twice greater than Canadians over 25. The youth unemployment rate is much higher than it normally is, and you're right that quite often the youth unemployment rate is higher than that of older workers. But the situation we're in right now is unusual, and it's very worrisome.
Is it possible, though, that we're looking at the data with old-fashioned lenses, in the sense that 35 is the new 25. So kids are staying in school longer, they're staying at home longer, and maybe we don't have to worry about the 19-year-old as much as we do the 27-year-old?
Well, we've actually done some the Broadbent Institute actually did some polling on this a couple months ago. We actually asked baby boomer parents and their millennial kids what they think about the current economy and their families' job prospects. And people are worried. Parents are worried about their kids. It's very clear, looking at the data, that the job prospects of millennials will be worse than for their boomer parents at their age. And so, all the numbers point to an unusual but solvable problem.
Is there a way to get at this same problem without kind of directly intervening? I mean, you point to the EU, but the EU has, many of those countries have very rigid labor market practices. We prefer a more kind of flexible labor market. Is there a way to encourage it, whether it's lower corporate taxes or tax incentives when you do mentor? Or are there other ways to do it that doesn't actually create a guarantee?
Well, first and foremost, our challenge with this youth guarantee is to the federal government to clearly make this a priority. I mean, this is the federal government that's talking about blowing $3 billion next year on an income splitting scheme for richer Canadians that don't really need it.
Right.
The investment that we're talking about that would shave more than 2% off the youth unemployment rate is a relatively meager $670 million, a third of what this government is thinking about blowing on income splitting, and matched by $670 million from the private sector. Again, 0.1% of the dead money being sat on by corporate Canada right now. So very clearly, if the government and corporate Canada identify this as a problem, think creatively, we can make a dent in this issue.
You touch on paid internships. Where are you on unpaid internships, which is something some businesses are willing to do? Is that offensive to youth, or does it create kind of experience opportunities for them?
I think there's very occasionally cause for unpaid internships, but much like the temporary foreign workers program, if I can use that example, this is a phenomenon that's got completely out of hand, and using unpaid internships to replace formally compensated positions is not something that Canada should tolerate.
All right, we got to leave it there, Rick. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.